Well, good afternoon. I'm glad that we postponed our event from yesterday till today because we would have had about 50 empty chairs. And it's real good to see you this afternoon. Well, welcome to the Korea Economic Institute of America. We're delighted you're able to adjust your schedule to make it today after yesterday's frightening weather. I'm Don Manzullo, President and CEO of KEI. I was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives for 20 years and served as the chairman of the Subcommittee on Asia and the Pacific of the Foreign Affairs Committee, with serving on the International Monetary Policy and Trade Subcommittee of the Financial Services Committee. We're privileged to have a fantastic expert panel with us today, including distinguished guests who traveled a long way from Korea to be with us here today. When I served in Congress, I voted for every trade opening initiative, including the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement. I knew America's future economy and prosperity was tied to overseas markets. 95% of the world's consumers live outside of the United States. I spent many hours convincing my constituents to look beyond the borders of the U.S. to seek out new customers around the world in order to lower their reliance on the U.S. market. In particular, trade agreements help small business exporters lower their risk of selling abroad by reducing barriers to trade. KORUS is a comprehensive and cutting-edge trade agreement that was initiated by a Republican president and concluded by a Democrat president after many years of tough negotiations. As a result, the agreement passed Congress in 2011 with strong bipartisan support. The vote was 278 to 151 in the House and 83 to 15 in the Senate. Since KORUS has come into force, started in 2012, both Korea and the U.S. have benefited from the agreement. U.S. exports of goods and services to Korea have increased by over $2 billion since 2011. Items that directly benefited from KORUS have seen their exports increase by 18%. For example, U.S. exports of beef to Korea reached a record level of $1.1 billion in 2016, thanks in part to KORUS. That's particularly significant for me because I still have my farm in Illinois where I raise the best beef cattle that you can get. The agreement also helped produce the highest U.S. trade surplus in services between the two countries. There are now more than 350,000 Americans directly employed because of more trade opportunities with Korea, an increase of 87,000 jobs since 2009, including 55,000 workers in the goods-making sectors. Korea now represents the fifth fastest growing source of foreign direct investment into the United States over the last 5 years, reaching over $38 billion. These firms employ over 47,000 workers in almost every state of the union and earn an average salary and benefits package of over $92,000 a year. More Korean investment may be on the way with recent announcements by Hyundai, Samsung, and LG. So why is there pushback now on KORUS? The current emphasis of the Trump administration is on reducing and eventually eliminating trade deficits for the U.S. as a way of returning manufacturing jobs to distressed areas of America. Just yesterday, the president's nominee for U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer highlighted Korea as a, quote, large deficit, end of quote, country that has to be dealt with in testimony before the Senate Finance Committee, even though the merchandise trade deficit with Korea decreased for the first time in 2016. Well, we can have a more philosophical debate as to whether or not this is a wise policy, and I'm sure Claude or Jeffrey might have something to say on this later. One way to achieve this objective is to keep pushing for market opening initiatives in order to have a free flow of trade among all countries, not by withdrawing from existing trade agreements and regimes. We also need to keep providing full information to both policymakers on all levels and the general public about the KORUS FTA. That's why I spend a lot of my time on Capitol Hill. In fact, I have appointments this afternoon with two members of the House to inform my former colleagues about U.S.-Korea relations, including the benefits of KORUS. That's why KEI developed fact sheets for every congressional district showing the extent of exports from the area to Korea. And that's why KEI holds forums all around the country to educate the American people about the benefits of KORUS and the U.S.-Korean relationship. In fact, this past week I spoke to 530 midshipmen at the U.S. Naval Academy about free trade agreements and the benefits of KORUS FTA. While every agreement can be reviewed every few years to determine if the deal is still accomplishing its original goals, a preliminary assessment shows that the KORUS FTA has benefited both sides and continues to contribute greatly to the strength of the strategic alliance between the U.S. and the Republic of Korea that is needed now more than ever. Now I want to welcome to the podium the president of KIEP, Dr. Hyunjun Taek, who is our partner that helped us make this event possible. He's done a tremendous job in running KIEP. And before joining KIEP, Dr. Hyun served as a Senior Secretary for Policy Coordination at the Blue House, Vice Chairman of the National Economic Advisory Council, Vice Chairman at the Minister of Gender Equality and Family, Chairman of the Korea Trade Commission, Professor of the Department of International Trade and Regional Studies at Inha University, where I have an honorary degree. He was also president of the Korea Development Institute, KDI. He received his PhD in economics about 3 blocks from here at George Washington University, received his MBA from Sloan School of Management at MIT, and a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics from Seoul National University. Dr. Hyun, we appreciate the fact you come all the way from Korea, and we look forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Don, for your kind introduction and a very long introduction. I thank you again. Yeah, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome each and every one of you to this seminar. I'd like to extend my gratitude to President Donald Manzullo and the staffs of the Korea Economic Institute for their instrumental coordination efforts leading up to the seminar. I would like to also express my appreciation for the participant speakers of that Jeffrey Schott and Kim Young-gi and Jung Kyu-chol, and the discussants of the Claude Barfield and Troy Stangaron. Don just mentioned that we have a good job to postpone 1 day, but at a cost. I said one participants who will talk about very important subject as currency from KDI, or said the institute where I headed. That Dr. Jung Kyu-chol arrived on Monday. That he was supposed to present his presentation yesterday, but he is having a flight back to Seoul today, so he cannot join this seminar. But fortunately, he made a tape recording, so we'll be happy to see his presentation on the video. We have all gathered here to share our insights on the future of Korea-U.S. economic relations. Throughout the decades of the Korea-U.S. alliance, both sides have witnessed the revolutionary development in their economic relations, both in terms of depth and width, culminating in the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement in year 2012. And today, we commemorate the 5th anniversary of this cornerstone development. The comprehensive and high-level Korea-US FTA has served as a milestone in upgrading the level of economic cooperation between the two countries. At the same time, it is important to emphasize that the Korea-US FTA has benefited not only Korea, but also the US as well. Don just mentioned a couple of numbers that how much this KORUS FTA benefited US. I will just mention a few numbers. The US share in Korea's imports has gone up from 8% in year 2012 to 10% in 2006. And a recent US report that is published by USATC, US International Trade Commission, that report states that the Korea-US FTA has resulted in trade balance improving effect to the amount of $15.8 billion for the US. In addition, since the implementation of the FTA in year 2012, the major Korean firms, the major Korean firms in the United States have hired about 25,000 additional workers. At the same time, Korea's electronic commerce import, I think that is the area of, a great potential in the future. So Korea's electronic commerce imports from the United States have increased by almost 3/4 since year 2012. And now more than 70% of electronic commerce import come from United States. Korea's 70% of imports. To continue this success and extend the benefit further, Korea and the United States should work together actively to improve the agreement and resolve all pending issues for the good of both countries. Korea represents a portal through which the U.S. can gain understanding of the economic and cultural climate in Asia. Identifying itself as a small, open economy, Korea has always been eager to become a more open, more democratic, and more dynamic economic hub of Asia. For the United States, it would be very important to have a friend on the other side of Asia Pacific who shares common values, a friend that will spread the seeds of peace and prosperity all over Asia. In these regards, special care should be taken to encourage even deeper engagement between both parties and to strengthen our voices in many important initiatives in the Asia-Pacific region. I am pleased to show my appreciation to all the participants here and look forward to fruitful discussion and exchange of opinion during our sessions. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Congressman Zul and President Hyun, for setting the stage and welcoming us all here today. What I'd like to do is just briefly, I will introduce our panelists. We have, as has been mentioned, a video now and PPT. So what I'll do is I'll go through and sort of give the program order. First, we'll have Jeffrey Schott, who is with the Peterson Institute for International Economics, where he is a senior fellow and works on international trade and economic sanctions. After Mr. Schott, we will have Dr. Kim Young-gui, who is a research fellow and the head of regional trade, is the head of the regional trade agreement team at the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy. Then we will have the video by Dr. Jung-Kyu Chul, who is currently a fellow in the Department of Macroeconomic Policy at the Korea Development Institute and an adjunct professor at the KDI School of Public Policy and Management. And I'd also like to thank Dr. Jung for coming in yesterday due to the weather and everything so he could take and record his presentation so that way we could still have his remarks here today. And I'd also like to thank Jenna Gibson on our staff who came in the weather as well to take and help make this possible. Then after that, we will have Claude Barfield, who is the resident scholar, or a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and a former consultant to the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. And I will be the last discussant, also serving as moderator. And for those of you who don't know me, I am Troy Stangerone, the Senior Director here at KEI. Thank you. And Jeff, I'll turn this floor over to you.
Well, thank you, Troy. And my thanks to KEI and Dr. Yun. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this session. Today marks the 5th anniversary of the entry into force of the KORUS FTA. Cognoscenti in the room will also note that it is about 10 years since the conclusion of the original KORUS negotiations. And there was a handshake. Though that deal went through a series of revisions before ratification in Congress and the National Assembly. Most people will not know, even the cognoscenti, that it is 17 years since Han Duck-soo, who was then Trade Minister of Korea, asked me and Fred Bergston if we would undertake a study on a very strange topic. What are the costs and benefits to the United States and Korea if they were so bold to pursue a free trade agreement? It seemed like an unlikely task, but Han Duck-soo was such an impressive and insightful figure and official that we said, okay, we will do the study. And we found great value for both our countries, and indeed that has borne fruit, as Don mentioned in his introduction. If I were to look at the 3 anniversaries, however, in my view, the 10-year anniversary is the most significant for 2 reasons. One, that's when the basic deal was struck, and when businesses started adapting production and trade and investment strategies to the prospective new regime. And 2, implementation delays after that deal was struck, caused by problems in both legislatures, concerns in both legislatures, diluted some of the expected benefits from the bilateral preferences. And I'll explain that in a bit. So what I'd like to do is have 3 basic parts to my presentation, all very brief. First, yesterday. Second, today. And then, no surprise, the third part is what happens tomorrow. So yesterday. Why KORUS? I think if you look back at the strategic vision of Han Duck-soo in 2000, he saw not just the opportunity to increase trade and investment, but more importantly, he saw the need to expand trade and investment with the United States as a means of bolstering competition in the Korean market through increased trade in goods and through increased foreign investment in the Korean market. He saw the need for a substantial economic reform in order to keep pace in a very dynamic neighborhood. And one of the best ways to do that would be to take a critically important trading partner and open the doors, sort of give a kick in the pants to innovation in the Korean economy. This required extensive trade and regulatory reforms, comparable in some ways to what Japan has been pursuing recently under the third arrow of Abenomics, a decade after the Koreans started thinking about it. That started in 2000. So there was a 12-year gestation period between the original vision of Han Duck-soo and the entry into force of the agreement. That was way too long, and the needed reforms induced by both the trade pacts and by domestic economic policy changes were too limited and incomplete. In the interim, so between 2004 and 2012, before the KORUS entered into force, Korea implemented FTAs with Chile, Singapore, the European Free Trade Association, the ASEAN countries, the European Union, and Peru. And following KORUS entry, Korea added FTAs with Turkey, Australia, Canada, China, New Zealand, Vietnam, and Colombia. What this means is that, in terms of the impact of the KORUS, that the delay cost U.S. exporters and investors important first-mover benefits in the Korean market, which had become much more competitive in March 2012 due to the enhanced participation by foreign companies, much more competitive situation than when KORUS talks concluded in early spring of 2007. So while there were notable and important benefits derived from our relationship, as Don has spelled out, and I think it was great that he gave that very substantive introduction. There were some concerns that the agreement did not meet the original expectations in both countries. But there are a lot of reasons for that, including slow growth, including the massive recession, and the recovery from that recession of 8 years ago. So what happens today? As a result of that both incomplete liberalization but more importantly, because of the expansion and more competitive nature of trade of the Korean economy, we see some objectives that have underperformed in terms of growth of trade. And the KORUS FTA faces criticism by members of Congress and administration officials because the bilateral trade growth has been sluggish and the bilateral trade deficit with Korea has risen sharply. While there was an improvement last year, the merchandise trade deficit is still in the range that gets the attention of White House bilateral trade deficit hawks. And as they were told during the recent meeting of the National Association of for Business and Economics, they need to go back and review their notes for Econ 101. But unfortunately, that's something that the president feels very strongly about. U.S. merchandise exports have been essentially flat since 2011, while imports from Korea have risen by more than 20%. And so we had a merchandise trade deficit with Korea of almost $28 billion last year. But people mention that, and they forget that we have a very healthy trade in services. And U.S. services exports recorded modest growth over the past 5 years, and the U.S. services surplus has actually increased quite a bit. And we now had recorded a $9 billion surplus in services with Korea in 2015, the last year that data was available. So when you look at the bilateral deficit in goods and services, it's much more modest, and indeed we have a healthy and growing trading surplus in services. Now, the U.S. Treasury has placed Korea on its currency monitoring list, and it's done so for the past several reports, semi-annual reports to Congress on international economic and exchange rate policies. And it's done so because of concerns that Korean authorities have intervened to resist won appreciation in the context of a large and growing current account surplus. Korea's current account surplus has exceeded 6% of GDP for the past 4 years. and in 2016 reached $99 billion, or more than 7% of GDP. So Korean officials argue that they need to hold a large amount of foreign exchange reserves as a precaution against disruptions for economic and political shocks in the region, and that the jump in the current account surplus is due to many factors, including a sharp drop in their oil import bill. Lower oil prices have reduced annual Korean imports by around 2.5% of GDP, but the surplus and the level of precautionary reserves still seems to me a bit excessive. That's why Korea is on the monitoring list, but it has not been called a currency manipulator, and indeed there have been extensive talks between the U.S. Treasury and Korea, and I don't think there is a risk of that type of naming and shaming in the immediate future, because Korea is managing its economy in a very conscientious fashion. But all of this sets the table for what's going on today, and what Don reported from Bob Lighthizer nomination hearing yesterday, that the Trump administration is going to want to revisit the KORUS FTA and reopen negotiations. And indeed, it will likely be in the first group of countries after talks are opened with NAFTA partners Mexico and Canada. While the administration has not set out an agenda for such talks, U.S. officials likely will want to revisit specific market access concessions, including on autos, regarding rules of origin and Korean emission standards and the special quota for entry of U.S. imports not meeting Korean standards but meeting U.S. standards. That has actually been one very positive area of our bilateral trade, where the growth in U.S. car exports to Korea has been so strong that it has outpaced expectations for the number of cars that would be coming in subject to this exemption. And actually, U.S. auto exports to Korea are now bucking up to the limit of the quota that was set in the KORUS agreement, and that's one area that could be usefully revisited. But there's also concern about rice, which was exempted from KORUS and which some members of Congress may want to see reviewed again. And that, of course, would lead to some political frictions in the Korean debate. The Trump administration will also want to add obligations to avoid currency manipulation, comparable to those that Congress required for new U.S. trade pacts in the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act of 2015. This is actually quite consistent with current Treasury practice, and that type of addition to the KORUS, as long as Korea is continuing to pursue the types of policies that and consultations with Treasury, I think will not lead to any significant new frictions in our bilateral relationship. So that's where we are today. Expect that there is going to be new negotiations. The new Korean government will face a challenging start with U.S. demands to rework KORUS. But I think the basic deal concluded a decade ago will likely be left intact due to strategic concerns and the underlying strength of our bilateral relationship. And so my prediction is that if the KORUS talks are reopened, it will lead to some headline transactions, maybe new quotas on autos, as I mentioned before, maybe some quotas on rice that may be required anyway for a broader Asia-Pacific deal in the offing in the medium term, and maybe some adoption of other TPP precedents in areas like digital trade. So that's today, and it's not as frightful as the prospects that perhaps the Mexicans are facing and looking at a renegotiation of the NAFTA. What about tomorrow? When I think about the future relationship going forward in my last 2 minutes or so, Korea had been preparing to join TPP for some time. It continues to need to support a broad Asia-Pacific trade deal, and I thus find it encouraging that Chile invited and Korea accepted attending a meeting in Viña del Mar, Chile, to discuss the future of Asia-Pacific economic integration in the aftermath of the U.S. decision to withdraw from TPP. I think this is important for Korea for three important reasons. It needs to have an integrated framework for its trade relationships in the Asia-Pacific region. And if you look at its trade, Korea actually ships more goods to the TPP 12, the 12 countries that signed the TPP, than it does to China, way more. And it needs to fill the holes in its FTA coverage. And by this I mean many of the agreements that were signed were less comprehensive than the chorus. There are lots of exceptions, particularly the deal with China. So trying to have a broader, more comprehensive agreement would benefit and provide additional impetus to trade and investment for Korea and its trading partners. And it needs to add new partners, especially Japan and Mexico. And those are two major omissions from its stable of FTA partners, and indeed it's one of the most comprehensive partnership alliances that any country has. And third, it has to refocus on its relations with China. The deal struck with China is substandard and not very supportive of Korean exporters to and FDI in China. That probably cannot be remedied through additional bilateral initiatives. Certainly not now, but even in the medium term. But a regional initiative that pushed China to commit to more than it has done in its existing trade agreements could be supportive. I think this is one of the reasons why Korea needs to be pushing a broader Asia-Pacific pact and participating in new discussions in that area, both to manage its relations with China and also to take care of frictions with and manage a new deal with Japan that has been on the table since December 2003, but off the table since 2004. So those are some ideas of going forward, generally optimistic, but challenges ahead, but ones where the United States and Korea should be able to continue to work together for our mutual benefit. Thank you very much.
How can I load the mic?
Is it not up there? Where's the...
I think it's up there.
So yeah, so just point towards the...
Oh, thank you so much. Okay, thank you for your kind introduction. My name is Yonggu Kim. I am the head of Regional Trade Agreement team of KIEP, co-organizer of this seminar. Today, I would like to talk about the KORUS FTA and the future of Korea-US economic relations. My presentation consists of three parts. The first, I would like to discuss the interaction between the Korean economic development and Korea-US relations. So, where I would like to talk about why Korean economic development matters to America. And then next, I will introduce our research regarding the effect of KORUS FTA conducted last October. And then I will make some suggestions toward further mutual prosperity. Okay. This slide shows the Korean economy has been transformation. The Koreans per capita income from 1953 to 2015, the Korea has experienced the unprecedented economic development in the world, so-called the miracle of Han River. Also, it is well known that the U.S. has played an important role in Korean economic growth. So, for example, the Mutual Defense Treaty has brought the peace and stability, the prerequisite for the promotion of economic development. And in the 1980s, when the Korea adopted the export-led growth strategy, more than 40% of Korean exports went to the U.S. And this slide compares the economic indicators of South and North Korea in 2012. In the 1960s, the economic situation of both Korea were quite similar, but in 2012, per capita income and population of North Korea are only 1/19 and half of those of South Korea. This shows that South Korea can be regarded as a successful model to support values the U.S. has pursued. As the Korean economy has developed, the influence of value alliance has prevailed. Also, as Korean economy has developed, its industrial structure and the export commodity profile has been changing from agriculture to manufacturing, from light industry to the heavy and chemical industry. And nowadays, more than 90% of Korean exports commodity is the high, heavy and chemical industries. This implies that we are ready to explore new areas toward industrial cooperation in high-tech sectors. I think the KORUS FTA can be regarded as another pillar along with the Mutual Defense Treaty based on the shared values to support Korea economic tie. So in other words, the Korean economic tie has been transformed from the military alliance to the comprehensive security economic alliance. At the same time, the KORUS FTA upgrade the economic tie by providing the institutional foundation to market-driven economic integration. Before the KORUS FTA came into effect, the FTA was so controversial in Korea, not only because of the economic reasons, but also because of the nature of Korea-U.S. relations. But now, there are the contradictory assessment of the effect of the KORUS FTA in the United States. The President Donald Trump blamed the KORUS FTA as the key clause for job losses and trade deficit, while Wendy Cutler, the former deputy of USTR, said the Korean economic slowdown could explain the bilateral trade deficit better. Actually, already as the President Manjulu mentioned, I absolutely agree with him in the sense that it is still premature to assess the full impact of the KORUS FTA, but one point is clear: the KORUS FTA has brought the mutual benefits to both countries. And left graph shows the trend in bilateral trade between 2008 and 2016. You can see some people might ask why the American firms could not export much more as expected, even though they could claim the preferential treatment under the KORUS FTA. The right graph might provide a clue for that. Korea's import from the world decreased by 9.4% over the period of 2012 through 2016, while the Korea's import from the U.S. increased by 0.4%. So this provides the the evidence to support the Wendy Cutler's argument. Due to the improved market access, Korea could increase its share in the U.S. market by 0.6 percentage point, and the U.S. share in Korean import also increased by 2.3 percentage points. According to Peterson Institute, the Korea's weighted average tariff level are about 8%, and U.S. tariff 2.2%. This means that Korea has lowered more tariffs through the KOROS FTA. And previous slides recommend us that we should take into account other contributing factors such as the economic circumstance of each country and exchange rate or fluctuation and so on. So in order to identify the direct effect of the KOROS FTA on the bilateral trade, we adopt the regulation approach. And then based on the estimation results, we decompose the change rate of bilateral export and import into KOROS FTA effect and other effects. This table shows the result of the composition. The magnitude and statistical significance of the effect of KOROS FTA on the bilateral trade turns out to be different industry by industry. But on average, the KOROS FTA explains about 1/3 of growth rate of bilateral trade. And in other words, without the KOROS FTA, the growth rate of U.S. export to Korea would have been only 9.9%. This number comes from the difference between 14.82 and 4.86. And based on the increases due to the KOROS FTA, we estimate the macroeconomic effect of the KOROS FTA in both economies. We use the computable general equilibrium approach. Specifically, we added the labor supply equation to the standard Jutan model as the USITC 2016 did for the purpose of comparison. And according to the results, due to the increased bilateral trade by the FTA, the Korea and the US have benefited by higher income growth, improved consumers' welfare, and new jobs. And let me make one point. The economic size of the US is about 13 times greater than that of South Korea. So in terms of the amount, the U.S. might get more benefit from the U.S. From the KOROS FTA, and also about 10% of the U.S. export to Korea and about 30% of Korea's export to U.S. are consumers' goods. It means the others, others are the raw material, intermediate good, and capital good. So we need to consider the industrial linkage and the effect of KOROS FTA on the trade with the other trade partners. And also the KOROS due to the KOROS FTA, the bilateral trade diversity has improved. So since the KOROS FTA came into effect, the share of the Korea's number of products exported to and imported from the U.S. has increased by 3.3 percentage point and 2.0 percentage point respectively. So this raises the possibility that due to the KOROS FTA, new American firm and new Korean firm started to export. Unlike the bilateral trade in goods, the KOROS trade, bilateral trade with U.S. in service sector recorded the trade deficit, and like the trade in goods, there are a bunch of other factors will might affect the bilateral trade in services. So when we compared Korea's the total trade in service with the bilateral trade in service with respect to U.S., the FTA seems to affect positively Korea's service trade with the U.S. in transportation and IPR. In particular, the growth rate of import in IPR from the U.S. is about 2 times rather than that of total import from the U.S. As the both agreed to extend the copyright term by 20 years from 50 years to 70 years. And under the KORUS FTA, the Korea has agreed to additionally liberalize its legal, accounting, telecommunication, and broadcasting services. And the last year, the third phase of legal service liberalization implemented. As the result, the 98 foreign attorneys with the U.S. license has been registered, and 22 U.S. legal constant offices has been established in Korea. Korea's outward FDI to the U.S. Was the $22,900 million over the years of the 2012 through 2015, and the Korea's inward FDI from the U.S. Was $16,200 million. So the Korea's outward FDI is greater than the Korea's inward FDI from the U.S. And over the same period, the Korea's total outward FDI increased by about 16%, while the Korea's outward FDI to the U.S. Grew by about 28%. So Korea's outward FDI to the U.S. Contributes to job creation in the U.S. So right graph shows the number of U.S. American workers hired by 12 major Korean firms. This number of U.S. workers would further increase if other employment effects, such as the employment hired by other Korean firms and subcontractors, are taken into account. Okay. There are the many suggestions to bolster economic tie between two countries in various areas. So today, I'd like to talk about some of them in detail. First, I think we should encourage the small and medium-sized enterprises to utilize the KORUS FTA better and more to promote the bilateral trade. According to the Korea Customs Services, more than 70%, the small SMEs account for more than 75% of the number of exporting firms, but account for only 6.6% in terms of value. So one of the reasons might be the low utilization of the SMEs. So in 2013, the utilization rate of KORUS FTA by major firms and SMEs were 84.5% and 69.2% respectively. More than 50% of the SMEs pointed to the lack of knowledge, difficulty origin management, and burden on verification as the reason why they did not utilize the KORUS FTA. So I would like to recommend to strengthen the role of the SME working group in implementation committee and hold the meeting more frequently in order to resolve the problems raised by the SMEs. And also, we can share the Koreans' experience on these outreach programs for the SMEs, such as the one-stop support center or the EFTA origin management system. Second, we should seek ways to upgrade economic ties from the perspective of the global value chain. As we know, the economic growth and the job creation depends on value added, not the growth export. And as you can see in the right graph, the U.S. The trade deficit with respect to Korea was the $3,756 million in 2011. But while in terms of value added, U.S. recorded the trade surplus with Korea of the 12,600 something million dollars. So, if the more recent data becomes available, we should assess the impact of the cross FTA in terms of value added. And also, I think the both governments, they focus more on the investment cooperation in high value added industry, taking full advantage of established FTA networks. Nowadays, the world surrounding us faces the challenges and opportunities as the technology has been developing, and the rapid changes in science and technology are giving rise to the new trade issues. So, along with the economic cooperation in this field, I think the both countries jointly prepare to set up the global rules because the agenda setter has first mover advantages. Okay, thank you for your paying attention.
Thank you for having me, and I'm very sorry that I cannot participate in, this kind of discussion. And today I'm going to talk about Korea's current account surplus. And Korea's current account surplus is increased rapidly. Before financial crisis, the average current account surplus is about 2%, but after that, the average is about 5%. And in 2016, I think it's about 7% of GDP. So it's huge. For other countries, for example, Germany's surplus increased a little bit, China's surplus decreased, US deficit decreased a little bit. Today, I'm going to focus on Korea's current account surplus. So why Korea has huge current account surplus? The usual suspect of current account surplus is exchange rate. But the graph shows that's not the case. Korea's exchange rate, Korea's won currency depreciates around financial crisis, and it is slowly appreciated. And recently, the exchange rate level is about its long-run average. Exchange rates probably have some impact on current account surplus, but it suggests that's not a major factor recently. So current account surplus is defined as trade balance plus net investment income, or we can express that as saving minus investment or income minus spending. So it's basically decision of intertemporal choice. So I think one major factor of Korea's current account surplus is demographic structure. So the figure shows that Korea's life expectancy is increasing rapidly compared to other countries. So in this slide, Korea's life expectancy during 15 years increased about 6 years. For other countries like Japan, it increased by 2 years. China, about 2 years. Other advanced countries, 1 or 2 years. So the speed of increase is faster than other countries. So this is about future. So the increase increase of life expectancy is continue in the future. This is studied by Contis and others. It shows that the life expectancy will be increasing about by 7 years for Korea. For other countries, it's about 2 or 3 years. Men and women, there's virtually no difference. Women's life expectancy in Korea increased by 7 years. How about older people? The trend is basically the same. Korea's life expectancy of older people will increase about 5 years. For other countries, it increased only by 2 or 3 years. So, Korea's life expectancy increased in the past and will increase in the future. Another problem is that we underestimate life expectancy systematically. For example, in 1960s, when the people born at 1960s, they expect their life expectancy about 53, but we estimate recently and it is about 75 years, so the difference is 21 years. So this bar shows that the error of estimation. Other country also has similar problem, but Korea's error is particularly big, and it continues, again and again. For example, the people born at 1970s, the error was 16 years. So that means people live long and they live longer than they expected. What's the implication on current account? So this is simple logic that the left panel shows typical life cycle of people. Income peak around their 40s, and they need to smooth their consumption with their income. So the recent case is the right panel. The life expectancy increased a little bit, but the retirement age is almost fixed. So their income is fixed, so they have longer lifespan, so they need to smooth consumption and have to reduce their consumption. That means spending relative to income decrease or current account increase. And actually that happened in Korea. So the graph shows propensity to consume, that is consumption to income ratio, because income has inverted U shape and consumption is smooth. Need to smooth, so they have to invert consumption to income ratio need to be U-shaped. But in Korea, that's W-shaped because Korean people spend a lot in their 40s for their children's education, and it is hard to smooth those type of spending. If we exclude that, it is beautiful U-shaped. So this graph shows that compared with consumption to income ratio in 2003, the consumption to income ratio in 2013 decreased for all age group, and it increased more for old people because they suddenly realized that they live longer than they expect. They need to adjust quickly. So this is kind of quantitative result. So my colleague Kwon estimates, how demographic structure affects current accounts. This is panel analysis with 82 countries. And this shows that, so this is a 5-year average, by the way. So from 2011 to 2015, the projections estimation says that it is about 5%, and we are around there. So most of current account surplus is actually explained by this demographic structure. So this graph is estimated by estimation of saving and investment and take difference. And it also says that the huge current account surplus will continue for next 5 years and then declining slowly. And from 2021 and 2025, it is about 2%. So the message of this is current account surplus is explained by demographic structure, and it shows that it will continue, in the future. So this is other analysis, and we focus on short-run aspect. So we identify shocks, and to do that, we employed a structured VAR. Variables are world trade volume that reflect, external demand, terms of trade, which is the ratio of export price to import price. Korea imports crude oil, and the price of oil declined a lot in 2015 and 16, and it improved Korea's terms of trade and caused current account surplus. The other variables are exchange rate, domestic demand, and current account. So this is the result. So it decomposed, how much each shock contributed to current account surplus. So world trade and euro exchange rate generally doesn't contribute much for this, and instead terms of trade and domestic spending contribute more. So for example, from 2012 and 2014, domestic spending was major factor. So in this period, Korea suffered weak domestic demand. But recently, the major part is, terms of trade, falling oil price contributed a lot. Exchange rates, contributes a little bit, but not the major factor. So this table basically shows the same information with the previous figure, and it shows that terms of trade contribute a lot, and domestic spending contribute a lot. And exchange rate contribute a little bit, but not much. By the way, this analysis does not capture the structure change. It assumes structure is fixed. So later, maybe we need to incorporate some structure change in world trade, terms of trade, and domestic spending. But at this point, this VAR analysis shows that exchange rate was not a major factor. Okay, so this is workshop about Korea and US. I mostly talk about Korea, so I need to say something about the relationship between US and Korea, but I don't have much to say. So this graph shows Korea's current account to the world, and red line is Korea's bilateral current account with the US. As we said, so the Korea's current account increased a lot, and this is about 7 or 6% of GDP. Compared with 2011, it increased about 4 times or 5 times. The Korea's bilateral current account with the US also increased, a lot. So this is about $20 billion. This is about $30 billion. So it's increased 50%. To see the kind of natural level of bilateral current accounts, so that's hard, and we need to, we need to investigate Korea's entire trade system, but I can't do that here. This is just the fact that, after this, period, Korea's current account increased, but the U.S. is not the, major factors. The current account increased more in other countries, to other countries. So this is conclusion. So my talk shows that Korea's huge current account surplus is explained by the Korea's demographic change, which is, rapidly increasing life expectancy, and we expect that this trend, continue over the next 5 or 6 years. So, and while the exchange rate contributes not much for this current account surplus, the policy implication. So the main reason of Korea's huge surplus is weak domestic demand driven by expanding life expectancy. So this is kind of bad sign for Korea, and probably we need to correct them. So since the main reason is that retirement age is fixed, but lifespan is extended. To overcome this, we need to extend retirement age, but Korean firms may disagree on that because in Korea, wage of old workers is very high compared with their productivity. So firms would not hire for those old people. What is solution? So as a first step, so we need to take the wage peak system. In that way, we can kind of align wage and people's productivity. Then probably firms may extend the retirement age. That means workers don't need to save much for their later life. They spend more. Korea's current account surplus may decrease faster than we expected. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, since Dr. Chung has already left, I think I'd like to make some supplementary explanation. Maybe many of you have worried about why he's talking so much about the life expectancy and aging society. Right? The topic here is about the exchange rate and the current account surplus. The linkage is like this. So the current account surplus is questioned by the U.S. administration. Then why Korea is making so much current account surplus? The key word in his presentation is the saving, because the Korea saves a lot. Then what is the relation between the saving and then surplus? It's basically, it's not as easy as Econ 101, maybe, but basic macroeconomic theory tells. For example, in the United States, we have seen this deficit. The fact that U.S. Have a deficit means the United States is consume more than what they produce. So consume more than what they produce means U.S. in effect having a minus saving. So because they consume more than what they produce, so minus saving. So on the other side of the equation, the Korea saves more. So Korea saving more is equal to Korea is having a surplus. Then why did Korea needs to save more? So that the main explanation is because Korea becomes aging society, the people tend to save a lot. So that is leads to the lower demand. And we have small surplus. Of course, Dr. Chung explained the various other factors, but what he's arguing is that the main reason is demographic change. Or I have a hand. I cannot defend the whole his presentation, but why? Yeah.
Doesn't it also mean, though, that domestic investment in Korea is going down? I mean, the savings could be employed in Korea. But they're not.
So more, I think, sophisticated. The savings minus investment is equal to export minus, yeah. Korea's investment is, not as big as before. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank KEI and KIEP for inviting me, though that may not run through when you hear what I have to say. It occurred to me that it didn't make a lot of sense for me to comment on the excellent analysis that we've come to expect from KIEP and from Korean economists. But it might be better, and this is what I'll do in my 5, 6, 7, whatever minutes we have, to talk about what I think the administration's, what are the foundations or what are the driving forces behind the Trump administration's trade policy. And you've got this is a blog posting that is going to go up at AEI sometime this afternoon, but I didn't quite finish the editing, so I just brought it along. And you can see from the theme, I think it was passed out, that in the debate in the administration between the so-called economic nationalists and more traditional Republican, both politicians and economists, I think there's a strong chance that the economic nationalists, as I say in the piece, are going to win more victories than they lose. And the background here is I would say that I start with the premise that we ought to take the administration at its word and look at what has been said, not just in the campaign, by the way. One could argue there are things that are said in the campaign that you wouldn't call them, but in the statements that the president has made since he's become president, in his inaugural address, in his joint statement to the joint congressional speech, and in, most importantly maybe, or of equal importance to the other things, is the so-called statement, the 2017 statement of trade policy, which just came out last week. And I think you'll find a consistency. And by the way, there's a consistency that goes back to the so-called white paper that the now Secretary of Commerce and Peter Navarro, who heads the Trade Council, put out in September. There's this direct line between that and what they're doing. And so that I would argue that there is a strong chance they're not going to win everything. And I should say that a couple of weeks ago, Jeff Schott's former boss and head of the Peterson Institute, Fred Berkson, and I had a mini debate over at Brookings at an event where Fred argued that, and I think there's something to this, that there are other forces that are going to intervene that will force the administration to modify its policies that we've heard, that the business community, the agricultural community, and the Congress. I think that's probably true, but as we've also found in studies at Peterson and other institutes, the president has a lot of authority on his own, and he can go ahead. And secondly, I would be very careful about counting on the Congress to thwart the president if they disagree with him. In this sense, I do not doubt, and we see this every day, that the leadership of Republicans in the House and the Senate, the Speaker Ryan, and Senator McConnell, particularly Speaker Ryan, who believes this ideologically. For Ryan, trade is a transactional set of agreements, but I think he's instinctively a free trader. They are certainly opposed to much of what we see from the administration on trade policy. But your typical Republican representatives is very much aware, particularly in the House, that President Trump is very, very popular in his or her district. And so I don't think you're going to find a lot of, they do not want a tweet to come out with their name on it, or the couple of them with a couple of other names. So I think that the reaction is not going to be as large, maybe, I think, as Fred thinks. I hope I'm wrong and Fred Berkson is right. The other thing to keep in mind, you've got this in front of you, is that this piece of the Financial Times over the weekend really was what piqued my interest in all this. And they described the titillating details of what they call a fiery meeting in the White House between the so-called economic nationalists and the more traditional. And they also go making the point that there's some move in the administration to somehow undercut or diminish Peter Navarro, who has been the spokesman, partly because he's there in the White House, got there first, but also because he heads the Trade Policy Council. There's some movement that when others come in, the National Economic Council, the Secretary of State, the Treasury will counterbalance him. That may be true, but the tantalizing thing for me was this kind of throwaway sentence in the FT piece, which said that it seemed that the president in this fiery meeting really went along with Navarro more than his other economic advisors. And that brings me back actually to these excellent analyses that we've just seen. I don't think, and this could be true in the administration, that the president and the top of the administration is going to listen to these economic arguments. And I think one of the reasons that I point out here is that whether you're talking about the questions of the trade deficit or bad trade deals or not enforcing U.S. trade laws, the economic nationalists in his administration are saying things that Trump himself has said and believed for several decades. If you substitute China for Japan, you could finish the sentences that he wrote or the things that he said in the 1980s. So that when you go into these meetings that the Financial Times talked about in the future, and you have his economic advisors around him, they will start behind the eight ball in a sense, that the president's instincts are going to be the other way. And it'll be a question of rationally trying to persuade the president that his instincts over the last 2-3 decades are wrong. And that's not going to be easy, I guess, is my point. The other thing to note is that just in terms of personnel, there's been a lot of focus on Navarro. And he has been out front, as I say, but you've got to realize that there are others, that Steve Bannon, who is very close to the president, has at his ear, is the progenitor of the theory of economic nationalism. He proudly has said that this is the America First is what we're all about. And he said that the pulling out of TPP was a pivotal moment in modern American history. So you're going to have that in the White House itself, and I would argue that with Wilbur Ross, the Secretary of Commerce, you have someone who has in the past and in the present, and since he's been Secretary of Commerce, has voiced the same kinds of sentiments and beliefs that we've seen from Navarro. So, and he co-wrote the white paper during the campaign with Navarro. So you really do have substance there. And then I guess the third person would be, we haven't seen much about him because he hasn't been in office yet, it's Lighthizer. But Lighthizer, as I say in the piece, is by instinct, by training, by background, a trade warrior. He has spent his life. And by the way, I am making no personal judgments on these people. I'm sure they're fine husbands, and they have sterling characters. I'm only talking about their political positions. Mr. Lighthizer is an anti-dumping lawyer. That's how he made his living. And he has also expressed great skepticism in the past about decisions of the WTO, of the World Trade Organization. And I think that when you take that, and then you take, and I would suggest to those of you in the audience who have not read it, I would read carefully the statement of trade policy that came out 2 weeks ago or 10 days ago. The 2017 statement of trade policy from USTR. It actually was probably written in the White House because Lighthizer wasn't there, though he apparently had some input into it. Some of my other colleagues in the trade community here, trade policy community, it was like looking at picking over the entrails of a goat. They were trying to find something. And much was made in Washington of the fact that an earlier draft was a harder draft than the draft that came out. I think that misses the larger point. This is a very strong, the first priority in that document, after a bow to, yes, we'd like to expand trade, the first priority to establish American sovereignty over trade. The implication being we have not had American sovereignty over trade in the last years. And then it goes on to the whole business about trade deficits and economic growth, in not as much detail as it had before, or bad trade deals, and also direct hits again and again at the World Trade Organization. They do not then threaten to leave it, but if you look at what the president has said since the election even, he has made the point that if things go against the United States in these deals, in the dispute settlement, that we'll just pull out. So my point is that while we don't know, and I could be wrong, it could be that the forces go the other way, I think it would be a mistake to underestimate the strength of economic nationalism and its consequences in this administration. One final other thing to shift to some points that Jeff made. I want to strongly reinforce Jeff's points that, though I have some nuance about this, that the Korea should not move away from a future in terms of regionalism in Asia. My own argument would be that, and I realize that this is a tough time in terms of Korea's political structure, but it seems to me that the trade bureaucracy just keeps going on no matter who the president is. I hope that is true. That Korea really should try to take the lead, even though it's not a member of the TPP, to push the other members. And we don't know what's happening in Chile today. And I know that Japan is the key to push the other members of the TPP to, I think, just put together a TPP without the United States. There are a number of economic and political reasons for this. In the first place, politically for the TPP members, they've already taken the flack at home from any sensitive items that they had to give compromise on. And the other thing is that most of the countries are already moving in terms of the domestic legislation to fulfill the obligations of the TPP. And thirdly, I think this is probably not going to happen because of the timing. It would be certainly better to face a truculent U.S. administration as a group of nations than it is bilaterally. And I will say again, to agree with Jeff, I think Korea is probably going to have up to a year in terms of actually facing the United States in terms of the bilateral so-called upgrade, because they will move to NAFTA, and I think that's going to take more time. And the second thing I think they will move to, and this goes back to their ideas about the trade deficit, is Japan. And so you will be able to learn from what they actually do demand. I do not think, by the way, finally, that they're going to move away from doing something about the trade deficit and something specific in terms of a VRA or threatening 301 unfair trade practice actions in terms of the negotiation itself. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claude. I'm, as moderator and a discussant, I'm going to lop like the vast majority of my time off so that way we can get to Q&A because I do want to get to that. I just want to make a couple brief points to maybe add one or two things and maybe expand on a couple. But first, I just want to sort of maybe second some of what Claude has just said in terms of like whether Congress could be a check on the administration. Having worked on Capitol Hill, there's a lot of good people there. I know sometimes when we look at things now that may be hard to see. But the challenge is, as a collective institution, Congress doesn't tend to take stands on many issues. And with Congress now being controlled by Republicans on both sides, there's a disincentive to taking a stand against your own president. So I think, there might be times where Congress could take a stand and push back. I think trade is probably not, for a lot of the reasons Claude said, going to be one of them. It doesn't mean it couldn't happen, but I think it's less likely. So what I'd like to do, we've talked some about the future of the relationship. Jeff has given some ideas. Dr. Kim has given some ideas as well. One of the things that, wasn't brought up but ties into one of Jeff's, I think the two countries need to work on cybersecurity along with the digital economy. One, not only is the digital economy going to be very important for both countries' economic growth in the future, but as we've seen, whether you think about it in terms of the Sony hack in the United States or banks and media in South Korea, North Korea is more than willing to take and hack into both countries. You have problems with China, Russia as well. If you're going to move further along the digital economy, you have to make sure your IP is safe that your systems are safe. And so I think we need to work more on cybersecurity. On energy, I would just note very briefly, now that the United States can take and export crude oil, we had initial shipments last year. That's expected to increase. It's something that the Korean government is interested in seeing doing. So I think in the future we're going to see energy cooperation, both in terms of fossil fuels, and while the current administration may not be the best one for this, I think there's a lot of potential for energy cooperation in renewables and others as well. If you simply look at Korea, essentially no domestic sources of energy. They have to import everything. There's a lot of incentive to take and cooperate in this area. And the last thing I would just mention briefly so that we can move to questions is when we talked about SMEs, I think there's two things that we should keep in mind or do. One, while it's important to take and increase exports by SMEs, there was one unique thing that the Korean embassy here set up, and this is only one part of, I think, both governments' efforts to try and increase exports on SMEs. But they did set up on US-Korea Connect a database essentially to try and allow for matchmaking between SMEs in the United States and Korea looking to either import or export certain types of goods and find partners in the other market. I think we need to we're 5 years in, we can start doing some evaluation. We should evaluate how these efforts have worked, what we can do to improve on them, and try to find ways to make this, more actualized. But the other side, and I understand why Dr. Kim would focus on the exports of Korean SMEs and what we can do to improve that. But given the political environment here in Washington, D.C., I think we really need to spend a lot of effort of asking what can we do to make it easier for U.S. SMEs to export to the Korean market. And so I think in part of that evaluation process, we should really look at, are there things, be they language barriers, be they certain rules and regulations that maybe are just different from what SMEs in the U.S. are used to dealing with, but what maybe is inhibiting those companies from exporting into the Korean market, and try to focus on that. And with that, I know we only have about 10, maybe 15 minutes left, but I'd like to turn to the floor for questions. As we do, there will be microphones coming, and if you could just take and state your name and affiliation. The gentleman right here.
Oh, here, okay. Thank you. John Burton with the Korea Times. How do you think national security concerns or factors will affect the administration's policy on trade with Korea? Because a tough policy would further alienate what is likely to be a left of center government, which already may be somewhat skeptical about U.S. relations.
Well, the best thing one could hope for would be what happened with the Obama administration, where I think that what turned Obama around certainly as much as the economics, was the situation that was deteriorating in Asia as he came into office, and the United States would have looked foolish if it announced this big pivot to Asia and then we refused to go along with the course. And so I think it really had a big impact. One can hope it does here, though. That means I'm hoping for some sort of, if not crisis, at least a deteriorating situation. But I think it is, even the situation is more fraught now than even when Obama came into office, certainly about North Korea. And we'll just have to see. I still think that they're going to want to go forward with some of the things that they have said they were going to go forward with here, and that will affect Korea. I don't know exactly how.
I think it's a little simpler than that. You already have evidence that Secretary Mattis, one of the first things out of the box for the administration was to go over there and talk in Seoul and Tokyo. The security situation is foremost in their minds, and you haven't seen the type of excessive rhetoric that has been directed against Mexico. So I think there will be a recognition that the trade policy agenda has to be part of the overall relationship and not leading that relationship.
I would concur as well. If Trump has been unconventional on virtually everything, on Korea, he's been fairly conventional so far, at least. Bill?
Yeah, I want to push back just a little bit on Dr. Jung's paper on which basically I read as saying the exchange rate doesn't matter, which I just have a hard time processing. I think his data basically show the real exchange rate hasn't changed very much. That's true. But you got to wonder, why hasn't it, given this huge increase in the current account, which means a huge decrease in the capital account. In other words, there's a huge amount of money flowing out of Korea, mostly into the U.S., and there's not a lot of money, even think about Japan and China, all that, their surpluses, their money is not going to Korea. Korea is becoming a poor place for foreign investment. It's never been a great place for foreign investment. The whole model there has been domestic savings, domestic investment, and it's worked very well. But now in an open economy, what I'm thinking is in Korea there's some very big structural problems with regard to the capital markets and to the flow of foreign investment into Korea, portfolio investment into Korea, that's creating a lot of trouble, monopolization of Korean industry, for example. And all these kind of rules, that are making it not an attractive place to invest. Lastly, my biggest concern about all that is that we may ultimately be underestimating the impact of North Korea on investment, domestic investment in Korea. So why are Koreans' money pouring to America and not the other way around? So there's just kind of comments, but I'm a little thinking that the Korean side here should be thinking very carefully about their own structural problems. And it would be easy to throw it off on Trump, but Trump's been in power for what, 3 months? Korea's economy has been weak for about 5 years here, so just some suggestions.
Any additional questions or comments? President Hunt? Right here, to your.
Yeah. I have a question or a comment to Jeffrey Schadt, but before I can respond, a short response. I think we don't have a long time to discuss, and I just want to say that I agree with you. We have a structural problem, particularly I think in the field of the capital market or capital flow. But that is different from what we are saying. Saying that because of exchange rate manipulation, that the surplus in the goods sector is happened. That doesn't. But it may be the case, as you mentioned, that our capital market is not working very properly, so that may encourage that outflow of the capital. So that I agree. The comment and question I want to raise to Jeffrey Schadt is about the relation between this deficit and FTA. In my opinion, I think the concern on deficit, maybe there are concern, but addressing the deficit through FTA may not work, and it's not a proper work. I think that addressing the FTA rule is just telling the rule of the game or repairing a playground. That cannot lead to the actual final score 3-0 or 5-2. But in that regard, you mentioned about this automobile side. That is a very important area of interest to President Trump. Can this automobile sector be remedied through the FTA revision? That has once were tried by President Obama. You mentioned the long story. President Obama, I think, tried to tackle this. So, can this auto sector be, I think that revised? I mean, the trade statistics by the FTA revision. So the VRA or VER, I think I can fully understand that. That kind of method can correct the numbers, but addressing the FTA cannot lead to that.
Well, you're right. A free trade agreement is not going to correct a bilateral trade deficit. But as I was suggesting in my remarks, there are some things that could be done to address the, at least, appearance or concern about unfairness in the bilateral trade relationship. In the auto sector, if you look at last year's trade, the U.S. exported about $2.6 billion of autos, trucks, and parts to Korea, and Korea exported about $25.1 billion worth of goods to the U.S. So that represents a large share of the bilateral deficit. And so that's why I suggested that that was going to be a focus of the attention of USTR. They're not going to change that through provisions of the trade agreement, at least not without violating basic rights that Korea has in the U.S. market. But there can be an increase in U.S. exports to Korea, as there has been a very dramatic increase over the past 5 years. That's not going to change the big numbers very much, but it will provide additional demand for U.S. goods. And over time, Korean companies can decide, and I think as they have been over the past decade, that it is more economical to produce in the United States some products and not export it from Korea. But that has to be a decision based on the economics of the firm. And I think that trade agreement does not provide much of a incentive for continuing that trade, because the preference margin in the FTA on finished automobiles is only 2.5%. That's the U.S. MFN tariff. So even if you tore up KORUS, that's not going to change very much the economics of exporting cars from Korea to the United States. And the only way that changes is if the U.S. imposes new barriers, which would violate all of its obligations in the WTO. So I think there is a more important focus on working to improve the climate for investment in Korea, because that would have broader macroeconomic consequences. That's why I started my presentation by saying the vision was create more competition, advance domestic economic reforms in Korea, and the trade agreement only went some way down the road, and the domestic political process in Korea only went some way down the road, and there's a lot more to go.
I think also it will depend on, again, to see how this plays out, how much they actually go forward with what they've said they're going to do, and that is their definition of a good free trade agreement is one that either diminishes the trade deficit that we have with that country or increases our trade surplus with that country. And so it could very well be that will be something that they will build into whatever negotiation, how the negotiation comes out. We can talk. People have, if you look at the last couple of weeks here with Navarro's, the derision that has been heaped on the head of Navarro and others in the administration, I don't think it's had any effect on him whatsoever. Lighthizer yesterday, and he's very careful, as everybody is in their confirmation hearings, When he was asked about the trade deficit, he said, well, when I think of the trade deficit or trade deficits, I look to what are the trade rules that unfortunately I'm paraphrasing here, we have to live with. So he was looking foolishly, directly at trade rules, not at the kinds of things that, we have talked about here this morning. It was in the paper and that we've revised in terms of the colloquy. So I don't know whether it's getting through or not. It doesn't seem to be so far.
All right. Well, I would like, if everyone will bear with me a moment, I have a lot of thank yous I need to get through. I'd like first to thank KIEP for co-sponsoring this with us today and helping to make this possible. And I'd also like to thank all of our Korean guests from traveling from Seoul, which is not the easiest thing to do, and to come here and take part. I'd like to thank all of you for being patient with us and allowing us to reschedule this due to the weather to today. And I'd also like to thank all of our presenters and speakers today for a very good discussion, very interesting remarks, and for also being willing to take and adjust your schedules to help and make this possible. So with all of that, if you allow me to thank all of them, thank you.